It is a great day. It is a great day to be a Judson Eagle, but we have a falcon amongst us. We do. From Taliaferro County High School in Crawfordsville, Georgia, or Taliaferro, depending on where you're from. You know, I'm from Kentucky, so much like Bob Kendrick, we have a city called Versailles. The rest of the world calls it Versailles, but whether it's Taliaferro or Taliaferro, it doesn't matter. And he is a falcon. This falcon came from Georgia, honed his skills in basketball at Park University, where I had the pleasure to meet him for the first time. He's in their Alumni Hall of Fame. He's an incredible person. He's been honored by so many groups in the Kansas City area for his work as the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum and organizations throughout the United States. But he has served so and made such a remarkable transformation in the Negro League Baseball Museum with a humble heart. Bob Kendrick started in the Negro League Baseball Museum as a volunteer in 1993, eventually becoming president in 2011. It was not a direct line. It wasn't a straight path. The path took him away from the organization for a few years and perhaps some of the most challenging circumstances that he's faced as a person. But all those years earlier with his family and his church and his friends and his classmates and his teammates prepared him for the challenges that he would experience, as did his mentor, the legendary Negro League baseball player, Chicago Cub, Buck O'Neil. And Buck O'Neil wrote his autobiography. It was called I Was Right on Time. And that is also very much the story of Bob Kendrick. He is a person that God has brought along at the right time, at the right place, for the right purpose. Because even serving as president of the Negro League Baseball Museum has not been without its challenges. Why, in fact, just this past year in June, on June 22nd, vandals broke in to the Buck O'Neil Education Center right next door to the museum itself and caused over $500,000 worth of damage. Damage that the insurance company did not and still will not cover because it was in the building adjacent or next to, not covered under their insurance policy. So Bob could have, turned sour and frustrated and bitter, but he chose not to do that. He chose to rely on the things that he learned as a young man, the things he learned on in college, the things that his wife and his family had taught him, and his friends, to include Buck O'Neil. And that was the purpose of the museum, the legacy of the museum, the history of the museum, the desire the founders had of sharing a unique part of American history that certainly was wrought with challenges, but now is an amazing, shining symbol of God's grace and provision. God knew that there was one person to lead the museum through that point in time, and is our guest speaker today. So please give a big round of applause to Bob Kendrick.
It is so wonderful to be back on the campus here at Judson University. So I want to thank Dr. Kroom, the trustees, faculty, staff, and of course all the students. When I go back home, I'm going to brag and say, man, all these young people came to hear me speak. Now, I ain't going to tell them anything about that double credit that you all are getting for being here. But that's okay. That's all right. It is all about how you shape the narrative, and this narrative will be shaped that y'all all came to hear old Bob speak, and I appreciate you being here. And as Dr. Kroom was referencing the incident that occurred back in June, and as he and his wife Cindy picked me up at the airport last night and was driving me back, and we were talking, giving an update on what's happening with that. He went through some of the things that took place and some of the issues that we're having to deal with and how this great spirit, and I'm so glad that the good Lord knows my heart and not my mind, because when this incident occurred, we're saving an old building that the Negro Leagues were formed in. It's called the Purcell YMCA. The Purcell YMCA is the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. So that's where it was all organized in 1920 in Kansas City. And so the building had been abandoned for years. We decided that we would take this building, rid the community of an eyesore, converted into an education and research center in memory of my good friend, the late, great John Jordan Buck O'Neill. And so this process had been developing. Everybody in the community is excited about it. We had rehabbed this first floor, and we had put down this beautiful parquet flooring, custom parquet flooring. And when I get the call that the building, that there was water in the building, and at this point we didn't know it had been done deliberately, but there was water in the building, and obviously I walk in and I see all this water on this custom parquet floor. I don't know if my heart was in the same place at that time. I'm telling you, I was hurt, and I was telling Dr. Kroom and Cindy, at that point, once we discovered that it was actually vandalism, it hurt even more. Had it been a water pipe that had burst on its own, we would have had the same amount of damage, but I wouldn't have felt the same way. But once you knew and realized that it was someone who had done this very deliberately, very heinously, it hurt. It hurt. And I told Dr. Kroom, I said, you know, at that point, I'm ready to give up on people. Yeah, because you realize that people will do some despicable things. But then you realize that you can't give up on people. No, you can't give up on people. And in the words of the late, great Buck O'Neill, who said, bad people will do bad things. Good people will fix them. Yeah, good people will fix them. And what happens? The good people started to come to our aid. They came in deeds, they came in spirit, they came in gifts, and all of a sudden you realize what you already knew, that there always will be more good people than there are bad people. Yeah, and so it restored, absolutely. It restores your faith in humanity, and in the words of the late, great Satchel, Paige, who says, don't pray when it's raining if you don't pray when the sun is shining. And that's what it reminds you of. You know, sometimes we want to wallow, and if I'm going to be a steward of this story, you can't wallow in self-pity, because there's nothing self-pityful about this story, and you understand that, so you pick yourself up and you realize with even greater resolve that you've got a challenge ahead of you that will be fulfilled, and the legacy of Buck O'Neill and all those others who played in the Negro Leagues will have this home there in Kansas City adjacent to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So anyway, I say all of that to say this. I promise you that I will adhere today to the 5 B's of public speaking. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the 5 B's of public speaking. Anybody familiar with that? It means be brief, brother, be brief. and so for my students, I know y'all will love that. So I'm going to say my few words, and I'm going to sit myself down and enjoy the rest of the program. And what an uplifting day that this is. And so as you know, they told me I got about 20 minutes to say whatever it is got to say. I'm from Crawfordville, Georgia. It takes me 20 minutes to say good morning. But we're going to try to get through this thing in as timely a fashion as we possibly can. The story of the Negro Leagues is amazing. It is absolutely amazing, and I think it represents everything that this university represents. This is a story about passion, pride, perseverance, determination, courage, the refusal to accept the notion that you're unfit to do anything. So I'll show you. You won't let me play with you? I'll create a league of my own. Well, there's a wonderful passage when you make your way into the museum, and it's taken from the Roman Catholic Bible, Ecclesiastes, and it simply says, "My son, if you aspire to be a servant of the Lord, prepare yourself for testing, set a straight course, and keep to it, and do not be dismayed in the face of adversity." Yeah. That was Negro Leagues baseball in a nutshell. You see, these athletes were willing to endure whatever social adversity that confronted them as they traveled the highways and byways of our country just to play baseball. That passion would not only change our sport, it would change our country. And that's the story that we embrace, and that's the story that we share every single day with thousands of people who come to Kansas City now to experience this piece, this forgotten piece of baseball and Americana. And so there are so many wonderful stories, and if I had more time today, I'd tell you about the legendary Leroy Satchel Paige. Yes, Satchel Paige, arguably the greatest pitcher this sport has ever seen. We know for certain the oldest rookie in the history of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball says that Satchel was 42 years old when he finally got his opportunity to play for the Cleveland Indians in 1948 as a rookie. Cleveland would win the World Series. As a matter of fact, it was the last time Cleveland won the World Series, was 1948 with the legendary Satchel Paige and Larry Doby. Many thought Satchel should have been named Rookie of the Year. He goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA his rookie season at age 42, which means he was likely closer to 52. He never told his real age. No, he never told his real age. Satchel was so fond of saying that age was simply mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. And that's how he led his life. And he would also whimsically pose the question, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? Yeah, and so Satchel was wise beyond his years, and one of my favorite stories, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a baseball team called the House of David. The House of David was an all-white religious sect based out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. And of course, they were characterized by their very long hair and very long whiskers. Well, they were mimicking David from the Bible. But they play a great role in black baseball as they would barnstorm all over the country, playing with and against Negro League teams, most notably the Kansas City Monarchs. Well, one of my favorite stories associated with the House of David, 1934. The old Denver Post tournament becomes the first organized baseball tournament to integrate. And so the House of David would recruit Satchel Paige to pitch for them. Now, old Satchel wanting to look like his white teammates. I tell people all the time, you can't make this stuff up. No, you can't make this stuff up. Satchel wanting to look like his white teammates would put on a wig and a fake red beard and would strike out 51 hitters in 3 games. And the House of David would win the $7,500 prize money, and you can rest assured that Satchel got a large percentage of that $7,500 prize money. Great story. Is indicative of the showmanship of Satchel, but also the tremendous talent of Satchel. Clocked his fastball at 105 miles per hour. But what really made him so special, and I can tell you now for any baseball fans, 105 is pretty doggone special. But what really made him so special? The pinpoint control. He could put it exactly where he wanted to put it, and even as an old man, he never lost that. So he couldn't throw it as hard as he once did, but he could put it exactly where he wanted to. He didn't use home plate to warm up in the bullpen like most pitchers do, throwing across home plate to the catcher. You all know what Satchel would use? A stick of foil chewing gum wrapper. The catcher would sit the chewing gum wrapper on top of home plate. And wherever the catcher moved the chewing gum wrapper, Satchel right over the top of that chewing gum wrapper. Yeah, and as Satchel would say, Nat, he would work both corners of that chewing gum wrapper. He never lost that. He was absolutely amazing. If I had more time, I'd tell you the fact that night baseball started in the Negro Leagues. Yeah, nobody knew this. They were playing night games in the Negro Leagues 5 years before they ever played a night game in the major leagues. But our history book is going to tell us that the first professional night baseball game, 1935, Crosley Field, Cincinnati, Ohio, Cincinnati Reds versus Philadelphia Phillies. Well, the history book is wrong. The first professional night baseball game, 1930, and it featured our very own Kansas City Monarchs. J.L. Wilkinson, who owned the Monarchs, literally mortgaged everything he had to pioneer night baseball, portable generated light towers. So not only could they play a night game in Kansas City, they could load them up on a truck and play a night game virtually anywhere. Truth of the matter is, by the time they played that game in Cincinnati, the Monarchs and the House of David had taken night baseball all the way out to Seattle. But Wilkinson wasn't doing it to be innovative. He was doing it for survival. You see, back then, the Negro Leagues were primarily relegated to playing on Sundays. Major League Baseball didn't play on Sundays, so the Negro Leagues would rent the ballpark, play that Sunday doubleheader. We left church. going straight to the ballpark, dressed to the nines, as they would say, looking good, going to the ballpark. Well, Wilkie was looking for a way to get the working class fan into the ballpark. So night baseball became the answer. Night baseball became bigger than Sunday games. Now, Sunday games were so popular that black churches would move their service time up an hour. Now, I'm going to say that again. Black churches would move their service time up an hour because if you know anything about the black church, you don't mess with service time. 11 o'clock Sunday go to meeting. When the Monarchs were home or when the Chicago American Giants were home, service started at 10 o'clock and everybody filed out going to that Sunday doubleheader dressed to the nines. But you see, folks, here's where the fallacy occurs. American historians never viewed Negro League baseball as having been professional. Thus, the major leagues could get credited with something that had happened 5 years before. And as I share with my young audience, it is like Columbus discovering a country that already had people on it. You can't do it. You can't do it. But the moral of the story is this: if you don't control the pen, you don't control the story. So your story is never written with the kind of accuracy or relevancy that it should be. That great museum in Kansas City is about taking control of the pen and finally telling the story the way that it should have been told years ago. We want the truth. We want the truth. Yeah, and this story is about those who overcame adversity. It's so easy to dwell on the adversity, and I think that is human nature. But there we don't. We focus on what they did to overcome the adversity. You see, that's the real story. And as I share with our visitors, that is a story that transcends race, it transcends age, and it transcends gender. So if I had more time, and I'm going to close with this because I think I'm about to run out of time, but there were two things that I really wanted to talk about. One was Jackie Robinson, and I know many of you know the story of Jackie Robinson, but do you really know the story of Jackie Robinson? Jackie Robinson began his illustrious career in 1945 for what baseball team? This is before the Dodgers. I heard it back there. Who said Monarch? I heard that back there. Yeah, he started his illustrious career for the Kansas City Monarchs. It started 1945. As a matter of fact, that is the 1945 road cap of the Kansas City Monarchs. Jackie starts his career in 1945 with the great Kansas City Monarchs. I think people think he just walked out of nowhere and started playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But his real rookie season was 45 with the great Kansas City Monarchs. And before he was number 42. He was number 5. Yeah. And had it not been for the city of Kansas City and the Negro Leagues, we might not have gotten who is now recognized as arguably America's greatest hero. You have to understand that Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. Yeah, he joins Brooklyn in 1947. That is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. That is before Brown versus the Board of Education. That is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. As my dear friend, the late great John Buck O'Neill would say, Dr. Martin Luther King was a sophomore at Morehouse College when Robinson signed that contract. President Truman would not integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So for all intensive purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country, baseball. And our country literally jumped on the coattail of baseball. And so the question that is so commonly posed to me is, well, was Jackie the best player in the Negro Leagues? No. No, he wasn't the best player on his own Kansas City Monarch team. And that is not to disparage Jackie Robinson, because Jackie Robinson is one of the greatest athletes in American sports history. He was a 4-sport star at what university? I heard it down here, I think. UCLA, I heard with that deep voice too. UCLA. Oh, he was a 4-sport star at UCLA. Baseball, kids, was his weakest sport. He was a much better basketball, football, track athlete than he was baseball player. Some say an even better tennis player. So there was nothing that Jackie Robinson couldn't do, but there were other Negro Leaguers who were far superior baseball players to Jackie Robinson at that time. But Jackie Robinson absolutely was the right man to be the first. You see, he had what I like to refer to as the intangibles that better prepared him to deal with the racial hatred that he would be confronted with. He had been a celebrated collegiate and All-American football player at UCLA. He had a little cachet surrounding him. He was college educated. He had served in the military. He was disciplined. He would become married. He is stable. All those attributes would be called upon to deal with that racial hatred. Keep in mind, when Jackie Robinson walks out on that field as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers, he is called everything but, as my mother would say, but a child of God when he walked out on that field. And when he came up to the plate, they knocked him down continuously. As a matter of fact, the opposing team pitchers would oftentimes be fined if they didn't knock him down. When he would slide into second base, he would oftentimes come up wet, where the opposition had spit on him. When the opposition slid into second, they came in spike side trying to cut him. They did everything imaginable to break Jackie, but Jackie would not break. You see, some of those other Negro Leaguers who had been so acclimated to segregation, they couldn't have handled it. Had you thrown a black cat on the field, say when Willie Wells walked out on the field, his natural instinct would have been pick the black cat up, throw it right back where it came from. But then the naysayers would have said what? See, I told you they couldn't handle it. But if Jackie can't play, the naysayers would have said, see, I told you they weren't good enough to play in this league. So Branch Rickey had a double difficult task of identifying the right guy because failure was not an option on either side of the equation. If Robinson can't take the abuse, the experiment is over. If Robinson can't play, the experiment is over. It could have been another 10, 15, 20 years or more before another black man would have gotten an opportunity to play in the major leagues. And you think about it, if it's 20 years later, think about the great stars we would have missed. We'd have missed that Birmingham guy, Willie Mays. We would have missed Hank Aaron. We'd have missed Chicago's Ernie Banks. Yeah, we'd have missed Roy Campanella. We'd have missed Monty Irvin, Bob Gibson, Roberto Clemente. Can you imagine our sport without those great stars? And if you can imagine what it was like before 1947, because they didn't just learn how to play after 1947. No, they were playing great baseball well before 1947. But you have to think, too, though, there was something very innate that had Jackie Robinson picked to do this. Because Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey had never laid eyes on one another until that day in Brooklyn when Robinson was summoned to Brooklyn to meet with Branch Rickey. Robinson goes into his office thinking that Rickey was going to create his own version of a Negro Leagues because nobody wanted to overturn their hand so people would know what was going on. And in an amazing 3 hours, two very strong-willed individuals came to one accord. You see, Branch Rickey had to trust that Jackie Robinson would not fight back. Well, Jackie Robinson was a natural-born fighter. He had been nearly court-martialed from the U.S. Army for refusing to give up his seat to a white officer. As the late, great Buck O'Neill would say, Jackie Robinson could duke and would duke. He'd knock you on your rump. But he had to trust that this natural-born fighter wouldn't fight back. Robinson had to put his faith in a white man that he just laid eyes on, that he was not going to be left out there hung to dry. And in some way, these two strong-willed individuals came to one accord in a 3-hour window of time, and it would literally change the course of American history. Now, I know all of you believe in divine intervention. Yeah, because there was something extremely divine that happened in that room at that moment, at that time, and it literally changed the course of American history. So yes, the journey of the Negro Leagues is absolutely a journey of faith. And as we all move through this world, it is wonderful to be able to lean on your faith. whatever trials and tribulations, and there will be some. Yeah, there will be trials and tribulations. And it's wonderful to know that whenever in the midst of those trials and tribulations that you have your faith to lean on, to help you move through those challenges. And so when I walked in that room and I seen all that water on that $100,000 floor that we had put down, and the reporter said, well, you sure are smiling. Well, but I was crying on the inside. But, you know, you just knew that there will be a way to restore. And these athletes understood that they were forging a glorious history in the midst of an inglorious time in American history. They weren't wallowing in self-pity. It wasn't woe is mine. No, no, no. These athletes were very proud. And what they did was they paved the way. As the late, great Buck O'Neill would say, they built the bridge. And in this country, we don't always celebrate the bridge builders. But in Kansas City, we are celebrating the bridge builders. So oftentimes, we celebrate those who cross over the bridge. No, no. We don't want to forget those who built the bridge. And I think for you young folks, that is so, so vitally important, because the thing that comes along with progress is the tendency to forget. And we don't want to forget. So again, on behalf of our team here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, our staff, our board of directors, I want to thank Dr. Kroom. I want to thank all the trustees, faculty, staff, and you students, double credit, coming out to hear old Bob speak this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and God bless you.